and in this video I will be demonstrating how to set up buses in Pro Tools. There are two types of buses which we often use whilst mixing. These are effects buses and instrument buses. Effects buses are used to route audio from various tracks to an effect such as reverb, delay, or chorus, which can be used for creative effect. Instrument buses are used to group together similar instruments which we might want to process in the same way. I'm going to start by showing you the I/O window, creating buses, and then show you how to set up an instrument bus and then an effects bus. So, in front of us here we have my Pro Tools session. It's a basic little jazz session, bit of fever going on here. And the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to the setup menu at the top of the screen. And the fifth option down here is the I/O option. I/O standing for input and output. And we'll be coming back to that in a moment. So I'm going to click on this. You've probably seen this window before. It's one of the ones that you use quite a lot when you're going into Pro Tools. Usually, if you have a sound card connected, you will see a vast array of inputs, microphone inputs, or line inputs on the input tab. The output tab usually shows you where your audio is going to be routed to, in my case, to an output called Fred Out, which is just my speakers on my laptop. And then in this tab, the bus tab, which is the one we're concerned with today, we have a variety of different buses, and you'll see them named bus 1 and 2, bus 3 and 4, bus 5 and 6, etc., etc. You'll notice that they're 1 and 2 because they are stereo. And actually, if we click this little drop-down arrow here, we have bus 1 and 2, and those two are in mono. So these are subpaths of bus 1 and 2. What I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to show you how to rename them, then I'm going to show you how to delete them, and then I'm going to show you how to create a new one. So, to rename this bus 1 and 2 path that I have here, I'm simply going to double click. And I can call this my bus. Great. So we now know how to rename our buses. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of some of these buses that I don't need. So I'm just looking at my outputs on my session here, and they are all output 1 and 2. So I currently have one called main mix, so I'm going to get rid of that as well. You'll notice over to the right here we have a mapping to output option. That is just for if we're sending certain buses directly to an output, such as our main speakers here. So what I've done, what I'm going to do is click on main mix, and I'm going to go right down to the bottom. I don't need any of these right now, so I'm going to shift and click to this bottom bus, and I'm simply going to go down to delete path. So now I have just one bus in here, just my main output. It's important that you also keep your main output in this bus, otherwise you're not going to hear anything and you'll have to set everything back up again. I'm going to create two buses whilst I'm here, one for my instruments and one for my effects. I'm going to choose my instrument group as my drums. You can see that there's a vast array of drums here, so I'm going to go for that. And I'm going to have a reverb bus as my effect. So I'm going to press New Path. And I'm going to drop down here so I can name them differently. So I'm going to create an instrument bus called Drums and an effects bus called Reverb. Great. Now, one of the things about creating buses is we have an option. You may have less options depending on what version of Pro Tools you're using, to create different channels or different buses with a number of different channels. Typically, for most applications, we're going to want to select a stereo bus. And to be honest, you can't go too far wrong if you do this. We can also create those subpaths that we saw earlier by selecting this. The reason we're using stereo here is that both my drums, which are panned, and my reverb that operates over a stereo field require the presence of two channels to actually replicate or maintain, preserve those stereo fields that we have within them, and those panned instruments. If we had a mono bus, then we would end up with just being able to use one channel for whatever we put through these buses, meaning that we might not hear things out of the left or right speakers anymore. So I'm just going to press create now. Okay, great. So we've got drums and reverb. And I'm going to press OK, and at this point, I don't actually need to come back into the I/O window if I don't want to. Now, let's have a look at what we're going to actually bus. So we've got these tracks here, and actually, let's colour them a little bit so we can see them a little bit better. Great, there we go. You can see I've got overheads left and right. These should probably go onto a stereo track at some point in the future, but for now, we'll leave them. Now, the way I like to think of buses, the buses that we just set up in our I/O menu, is I like to think about them as wires. And we're going to connect those wires throughout Pro Tools, throughout our digital audio workstation, in order to connect different channels together in some way. So, if you've got a wire that you need to plug into something, it plugs into two ends. So currently, we have one end of it, which is each of our individual drum channels. So we need the end that's going to be plugged into something, the end that's going to receive the audio from all of our drum channels. So for that, I'm going to go to Track, and I'm going to go to New. And we're going to use a type of track called aux input for this. And we're going to select aux input, and because our buses are stereo, we're also going to have stereo buses. And I'm just going to create one for now. And happily, that has come up just next to my drums, so I'm going to leave it there. And I'm going to call this drum bus, which makes it nice and simple. Okay, so we have our two channels, or multiple channels, that we're going to plug our virtual cable into. The next thing we're going to do is connect that cable up. So quite simply, down here, we have our I/O selection boxes for each channel. You might be familiar with the inputs of these if you've selected different mic inputs for certain channels when you've been recording. However, today we're going to look at the outputs a lot more. And I'm going to click on our output, and we can see output 1 and 2, which is our main output. We're going to select a different output. Now, we don't have any more outputs here, but we do have a bus menu. And we have our drums and then our subpath for those drums. We want to select drums stereo. And you'll see that drums comes up in our output here. If we select drums mono, we can see that our pan knob here has entirely disappeared. Select the right channel, there we go. It has entirely disappeared. This is because this channel is only being routed to the left channel now, and so there's no panning to be done. So it's important to ensure that you do select this stereo channel. If you want to be doubly sure of this, you can just not create the subpaths when you go into your I/O window. So I'm going to do this for all of these as we go along here. Okay, good. So all of our drums are now outputting to drums. If I mute all of the rest of my track, press play, we're not hearing anything. And that is because we've connected up our wire to the output, but that wire is not going anywhere. So we need to select an input on our drum bus channel. And our input is going to be drums. And we can see that level bouncing around in our drum bus and also over on our master fader over here. So that's it. That's an instrument bus created. Nice and simple. And you can repeat that for your guitars, woodwind. If you have an individual channel, you might not want to though. And all of our vocals. Okay, so next we're going to work on our effects channel, our reverb channel. And once again, could go back into our I/O and create a reverb channel, but I've already done that. And I'm going to go to track and new. It's going to be stereo again, and it's going to be an aux input once again. And that's created there. I'm just going to move this over here, and I'm going to name it reverb. Now, our reverb channel is obviously going to need to be reverberant, and for that, we're going to load up a plugin. Loading up plugins is done from our inserts at the top here, and typically for a reverb, we're going to go multi-channel, and we're going to go for reverb. And I'm just going to load up just a standard stock reverb that comes with Pro Tools. There we go. Important thing here on any reverb when setting up on an aux channel is that we have our mix set to 100%. This is sometimes known as wet-dry as well. Occasionally it's down as ratio. Make sure it's turned all the way up. We just want reverberated sound coming through this reverb channel. We don't want any of the original sound. The reason is, if we have the original sound from one of our, say, vocal tracks down here, plus some original sound, some dry sound coming through our reverb channel as well, that sound is going to stack on top of one another, and it's going to be perceived to be louder. So my settings here don't matter. You can play with them if you want. For now, I just need to make sure that my mix or my wet dry is on 100%. Okay, the next thing I need to do is set up my wire, connect my wire up. So I'm going to go to input, where it says no input, and reverb. And we have reverb at the top of our reverb channel now. So anything that we now take to the reverb channel is going to pass through this. Now, setting up an effects bus is somewhat different from setting up a drum bus or an instrument bus here. And the difference really is the way that we route it out of the original channel. Because in an instrument bus, we're wanting to group all of these channels together and fade them up and down, or perhaps apply some sort of effect to them with our inserts, we want them all, and all of the audio from them, to go through one fader. What we want over here, let's say with our sax track, is we want to send just a portion of this signal to our reverb. And for that reason, we do not use the output here. We don't select reverb here. We come up here to sends A and E, or any of the sends if you have more enabled. And we click in this little box, and we can see by navigating to bus that we have reverb. And I'm simply going to select that reverb. Now, what you'll see appear on the screen is one of these little faders. And by default, it will be turned down. Going to navigate, so I actually have my sax selected. Good. As the sax is playing, and I turn this fader up, you'll notice that the green bar here starts to move up with it, in alignment with the sax track down on the main window, and also our reverb track over here starts to light up. I'll move this next to here so that you can see it a little bit clearer. Okay, so we have our reverb control on the left here, we have our original sax track, and we have our reverb track. When you're using buses, it's often a good idea to have the bus that you are using and the channels that you're routing to it soloed so that you can actually hear the effect. Okay, so I'm going to press play now, and we can hear a bit of that sax coming through. And if I increase this fader, we should hear more and more reverb coming through. So what we're doing there is we're preserving the original sound of the saxophone, but we're also adding in reverb on a separate channel. Please refer to lecture materials for why we do this and why we shouldn't put reverbs individually on audio channels that we have here. Okay, thank you very much.